Well, I did get a letter from one of my readers. And this may have been what you were thinking about. Who was talking about his daughter's application to Annapolis. And he said that she went down for the interview. And there were several people there to be interviewed. And the interview board was like 3 civilians and 1 four-striper, kind of thing. And when it was his daughter's turn, he said his daughter was a good, strong B student, but she was very active in extracurricular activities and sports and whatnot. Anyway, she went down for an interview, and they asked her sort of the standard run-of-the-mill questions. And then this Navy captain says, I noticed that you were reading while you waited to come down and speak to us. He said, do you like to read? And she said, oh, yes. And he said, really? What are you reading right now? And she says, well, right this minute, I'm reading a novel, science fiction novel, by someone named David Weber about a naval officer. And he says, oh, Honor Harrington. And she says, well, yeah. And he says, well, what do you think of Honor Harrington? And she's like, well, I think that I'd like to think that I would, measure up to her standard, that, I think that she has the right attitude where, duty and responsibility to country and all this is concerned. He says, oh, okay, fine, thank you. That's the only question that he asked her in the entire interview, that he asked her. I mean, he was actually listening to everybody else. But then he walked her back out to her mother, which he had not done with any of the other interviewees, and told her mother, I think your daughter will do quite well at the academy. And her appointment to the academy arrived 3 months later. And so this guy was writing to me, he was saying, I have no idea whether or not Honor really got her into the academy, but, I just thought you'd like to know. And I thought it was really cool that this guy, recognized the books. I don't know if that was maybe part of what you were thinking about there with the...
I was thinking of the OCS, and we'll probably, the nice thing about having to redo the questions, I will redo it somewhat.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
Yeah, it breaks my heart. That way, if I do the
They're
not audible.
Yes,
on here.
yes. But you can leave mine in and make me look like a real jackass.
Oh,
Yeah.
of course.
Yes, of course.
Oh,
I had one guy, was a Los Angeles class skipper, and he told me, he said, well, he said, I got a bone to pick with you. I said, yeah, I don't even know you. And he said, they were sending him out on like a 2-3 month deployment. And he was like, well, I better take something to read. So he went and he found this guy named David Weber who was writing a series named Honor Harrington. He bought like the first 4 books in the series. The first ones weren't that thick, but then they were getting thicker. He figured it'd keep him busy. And he said, and there I was 1 week into the cruise and I'd finished them all. Okay. And didn't have anything left to read. I had to start over again. And I said, well, I'm sorry. And he said, write more. I was like, I'm working on it. That kind of comment makes you feel good. It always makes you feel good when anybody likes your work well enough to tell you so. But when it is someone who is himself or herself from the military community, and what you're writing is military science fiction, then it makes you feel especially good, because you feel like what you're doing is resonating with the people you're actually writing about. And I have enormous respect for people who volunteer for the military, and especially for the combat arms. I think that it takes a special sort of intestinal fortitude to cold-bloodedly put yourself in a position where you may be called upon to risk or even lose your life for your country. And I believe that it doesn't automatically make you a saint. It doesn't automatically entitle you to a lifetime free ride, but it damn well entitles you to respect, and it entitles you to consideration, and it entitles you to support, and it entitles you to not be jeered at by people who were not there and who didn't have to make those decisions or face those choices, but who all know far better what should have been done than the people who did have to make those decisions and face those choices. One of my very close friends, Richard Earnshaw, was a combat vet. And he told me about one night in Vietnam where he knows that he personally killed like 5 or 6 men because he was the one on the light machine gun that night. And he said, you could hear some of them out there, screaming for a long time. And he said, and at the time I was horrified, and I was also just overjoyed that it was him out there screaming instead of me or one of my buddies, because they'd been trying to come in through the wire, But he said, somebody who hasn't done that has no right to criticize someone who has, whether the person who's done it is supporting the war or opposing it. Okay? He said, you have the right to disagree with that person, but you do not have the right to set that person aside, to dismiss the value of that person's observation, even if that person fundamentally disagrees with you or with someone else who was there. Because unlike you, they paid cash for their beliefs and their views and their concerns and their hopes. And that, I think, is something that we sometimes tend to forget. We also tend to forget that most senior officers weren't always senior officers, that they were junior officers once upon a time, and that those experiences are bound up in their decisions to send other young men and women into harm's way. They know what they're asking of their personnel because it was asked of them. I think we tend to forget that. We tend to say, well, generals are, what do they know about it? They're isolated from, they're this, they're that, they're the other. Well, General Smith may be, but First Lieutenant Smith wasn't. And First Lieutenant Smith is where General Smith came from. And I think that dismissiveness of the military, which is very much a part of the American psyche, the American tradition, is one of the reasons why I write military science fiction. Because I think that it is a dismissiveness which serves all of us very poorly on so many levels. And because it is grossly unfair, especially when it's coming from people who have no military experience of their own whatsoever, but may have very, very sharply formed views about what the military is and what its function is.